we do it
Oh
here?
my God, okay. Our next guest, Jeremy, part of that special inaugural group at the very, very first AI Tinkerers.
And the first time I got you up here, you keep mentioning him.
Well, Jeremy's a very interesting fellow. Trained lawyer, but also hardware geek. Okay, and I say that in the most affectionate manner.
But
Yeah.
lawyer and hardware geek doesn't like really go in one sentence.
Well, you'll get it when you meet him.
Okay.
Very interesting guy. Also, model pre-training expert. I stay at the application layer. Jeremy goes very far down into the hardware.
Pre-training.
Into what he calls continuous pre-training. But he can also talk philosophy and knowledge and whether these things
And Terence McKenna?
are Terence McKenna, maybe we can ask him.
Okay.
But he can get into debates on whether how these models think and learn, and also go all the way down to the hardware and into the model. So it'll be a very good discussion. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Hi, Tanya.
Everyone keep telling me Jeremy.
Interesting. Okay.
So, and what do? You're a lawyer, but who's also a hardware geek.
So I guess more simply, I used to be what's called a private M&A lawyer. So I used to do work in the corporate space dealing with, say, private equity or venture capital funds, buying and selling businesses and managing their portfolio of investments.
Yeah, but hardware geeks are those people that who lives with all these machines and then like have like all the computer lids open and then start.
So that's my living room right now. And honestly, that's been my living room ever since way back when as well. So I started building computers during high school. When I was 14 years old, I really wanted to play Call of Duty and my computer could not run it. And I remember I met this guy and he said,
So we have all these crazy people like we have the war like the Orchilab people tell us that they built Orchilab because they want to play Warhammer.
it doesn't surprise me.
And then now you are telling
So
me that
I met a guy who told me it's cheaper. You will save more money building your own computer than just buying one off the shelf. So for me, it's just like, of course I want to save money. I'm cheap. So I want to learn how to build a computer. And that's how it all started, really.
and okay.
Basically, though, then a thing called magic internet money, otherwise known as Bitcoin, came around. And then there was also Ethereum. Actually, no, before that, there was Dogecoin. So I first remember, this was end of 2013, Dogecoin came out on a lot of tech websites. And it was billed as, this meme alternative to Bitcoin. I think it was founded by an Australian as well. So from memory, I just remember, oh man, this is cool. I could get magic internet money just by running graphics cards. I like them, so I'm more than happy to buy a bunch to see if I can dig up a bunch of Dogecoin. So that started me going much deeper down the rabbit hole. Fast forward many years later, it turns out all of that knowledge is very relevant to building AI servers or LLM servers. So because I'm now running a legal AI startup here, that knowledge is very useful for building out my own hardware that I train models with.
What kind of legal AI startup do you do?
So I run a startup that focuses on private equity fundraising or just private fundraising. So what that means is that you have a fund or someone that wants to create a fund and they want to find investors. And in that process of finding investors, you need contracts for that. So what those contracts do is sort of govern how the money manager manages the money, how that money gets put into the fund, and for each of those investors, whether or not they have special rights over others and so on and so forth. That process is really expensive, actually.
And sound very complicated already.
It is very complicated. But having that background in at least the private space, and also now a bit of dabbling in LLMs, I feel like there's a massive opportunity to actually just focus and hone in on just that one industry.
To have AI to do this.
Exactly. Or at least to help the lawyers do it. Not necessarily replace them, but can work side by side with them. Or even on the client side, I honestly think that's where the opportunity is. The fund managers themselves, they have to sign off on everything. When us on the legal side, we're say in the law firm, what we call external counsel, when we send out the email saying, hey, we've reviewed this, these are the comments, we're CCing the non-legal guys as well, because they're going to be going through it. They're also going to be signing off on it. They email back and go like, hey, what about this or that? So the non-legal people, they also very much have a stake in or an interest in seeing this kind of product. Yeah.
And so we had another like lawyers that was working on IP, like Kenneth and
Ron.
And Ron.
Yeah.
So we have like two lawyers who were working there.
Yeah.
And then they said that so because AI because of law that you very often to do with client lawyer privilege.
Yeah.
So you have to have your own server.
So and that is exactly why it just so happened all that knowledge into building systems to do crypto mining is very useful for building inferencing servers. The biggest considerations there are actually not just like what's the fastest, but also how do you make sure it's reliable? Heat output, how do you manage that? Power consumption, obviously that's a problem as well.
Heat output is because if you have a lot of computer, let's say you have 3 computers, you already can feel that.
Well, it's not even just that. When you are running the models and calculating
in full gear, that it will overheat if you don't help it to cool down.
Well, not so much that. Sorry, I'm going to get a bit technical here. It's more that, say for example, you have a graphics card. A good workstation one, say, consumes 600 watts. A space heater is about 2,000 watts. So you can get 4 of them, and that's already the equivalent of 1 space heater in terms of energy consumption.
And Hong Kong can get very hot in the summer.
Don't get me started. But I mean, right now it's winter, so it's been quite nice having it in there. But during summertime, it's a headache because you have to brute force it with air conditioning, and it's not efficient, but you got to do what you got to do.
It's almost like you're having 2 husky and 5 Malamute.
Thank God I don't have a husky or Malamute, or Samoyed, but that absolutely is the case. Yeah. I feel sorry for owners of those types of dogs where you actually have to keep the aircon on 24/7, or they're not going to survive. Well, at least in terms of my own usage, my server's not being hit 24/7. I don't have a finished product yet, so it's not something where I'm having to run there. But if, say, for example, I was going to deploy it at a client's place, they will need to figure out in their data center or their server room, is there adequate airflow? Do they even have the power, like the actual cables running in that can support that kind of power consumption?
So electricity bills.
It's always a consideration.
And also the heating or cooling bills. So that really
that's a headache.
So if you build it yourself,
then I bear the cost myself. So the benefit of building it myself goes back to what Ron and Ken were saying, which was that you want to care about how the data is being handled and where it goes. If you're using, say, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, or Gemini with Google, that data is going all the way out onto the internet. I'm not going to accuse anybody of anything, but ultimately, from a lawyer's perspective, you sign an agreement saying that you trust that they manage your data in a private and safe way. But if they are found not to do so, what recourse do you really have against them? Are you going to sue Google? How much power do you have to actually force them to delete the data that they've taken? Realistically, not much. And for me, because also for everyone else watching, I was there to hear part of what Will was discussing earlier. So what Will was saying earlier in terms of pre-training data, I agree with him on that point. It's that we've hit the limit in terms of what that pre-training data has. And if we delve a bit deeper into that, what does that pre-training data look like? If you look at how OpenAI and Anthropic have been sourcing their data outside of the domains of computer science and maths, everything has just been scraping the internet and pirating every written piece of text known to mankind. And in a lot of domains, it just so happens that everything that's been written down is very incomplete. So that extends to the legal domain where, for example, particularly with private funds, they're private for a reason, and they're called private for a reason. That data, everything to do with how everything is negotiated, even the agreements themselves, they're not out in the open. So as a result, you can have Anthropic wax lyrical about, hey, we have this amazing legal model now, quite frankly, either they are hiring thousands of lawyers to basically annotate a lot of data, which I don't think they have the resources to do, quite frankly, because lawyers are very expensive. The alternative is just scraping the internet and trying to cobble together something that works. And realistically, from what I've seen and what other lawyers have seen, the models can sort of get there, but once you've got something remotely complex, it just falls apart. So it falls apart like a really badly baked sponge cake. So,
well, if you're a hobbyist sponge cake baker, you can.
I burn kitchens down, so I'm not a hobbyist
So
whatsoever.
no, but if you're a hobbyist, you can like if you burn your kitchen down, that's only one kitchen.
It's true.
But if you are dealing with something that is professional,
If you're in production, so to speak,
you
then
cannot afford this kind of mistake.
Exactly. And for lawyers in particular, because they charge out at such a high rate, that means that technically if they make a mistake, that is worth a lot of money at the end of the day. Going back to the pre-training data piece though, so the biggest issue is that because we are lacking so much data, it's a question of how better can we capture such data? Does it even make sense to capture it in text? For legal work, I think so, because obviously inherent in legal work is text. But for a lot of other things, again, Will was bringing up the example of space in UI. You also think of space in terms of depth perception. You think of fixed points in space which are relational to each other. These are things that are not actually very well represented in text.
Well, we had the Orchilab CEO was talking about actually even fixed point in space. It's because of like if you use phone camera, different phone is different, and
it's true that the lens is going to warp differently and distort things differently. Then there's the post-processing in software that each phone vendor will do things differently. So that becomes very difficult. Yeah.
Because we don't think about it. It seems like space is space, right? You know, I put my things here, my things here.
Well, once you play with a few cameras, then you realize, oh, actually, it is really different.
Yeah.
I mean, you ask any camera enthusiast, why do they choose Sony over Nikon, for example, or why do they insist on Canon?
Yes.
Or me, where I'm just like, I love my iPhone photos, but I'm also using an Oppo and I'm finding that pretty all right. But I wouldn't touch, say, a Samsung, for example.
Yeah, that has something to do with taste and also...
Absolutely.
You know.
But that materially impacts if you're, say, trying to extrapolate very precise data. But that goes back to the main point, which is that pre-training data. Because pre-training data, some things have to be objectively correct.
But we humans are not very objective. And very often, especially when we write in text, when we write about things, that's very subjective. I am very good.
You're talking to someone that dealt with contracts. Everything is interpretable, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to have a way. But some things, though, still can have a degree of objectivity, right? Say, for example, if you were to leave out a comma in a sentence, that could completely change the whole meaning of the sentence, right?
Yeah.
So those kinds of, I would call artifacts, where that one tiny thing can change everything. I think this goes back to the issue of, are LLMs necessarily still the right tools? I think in a lot of cases they are a very efficient tool, but they're not necessarily the most accurate still. In the legal space, though, what I'm seeing is that it can definitely help save a lot of time, save a lot of headache. And when I say saving time, it's not necessarily saving time in terms of making very complex processes simple, but it's more that it takes away a lot of the menial and painful work.
Actually, Kenneth was talking about this, like, you know, the very laborious tasks. And very often that junior lawyer make mistake is because they have to do certain tasks laboriously 5,000 times.
Yep.
And that's when all the comma get lifted out. Right?
Basically, one is that. Two, I mean, you look at any junior recruitment ad for a law firm. I guess no law firms are hiring at this stage now, but given the market. But if you were to look at them in years gone by, they would always say you need to have attention to detail. And it is this very thing. I remember way back when I was just paralegaling at a law firm back in Sydney. It was a huge litigation. It was worth a few $1 billion. So we needed to actually go through reams upon reams upon reams of documents and actually make sure that what we were spotting out was relevant to the case, because these documents that we spot would then be brought up in court as evidence to support the case, or our client's case. The thing is, and I found this bewildering because I was a paralegal, but I had graduated at that point, and there were other paralegals who were law students, and they were actually just randomly marking documents as relevant when they absolutely were not relevant. And that doesn't require reading the text to know it's not relevant. There's just a freaking picture there that is so patently obvious. In 0.1 of a second, you can look at it and go, no, that's not relevant. But they were just randomly marking things. I mean, attention to detail and work ethic, I feel, are very closely related to each other. But that also means that technically, as part of the human recruitment process, there's a lot more to do with spotting out someone who has the right attitude than it is someone who's just not going to get tired as easily, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also if they actually have any interest in the area of work.
Interest is one thing, but you can be interested and have a very lax work ethic, and that means your interest isn't going to really take you very far.
I wanted to talk to you more about, or have Tanya talk to you more about, the challenges in getting the right data for your pre-training process.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into sort of concepts of knowledge that you might not be able to write down explicitly easily. Like sort of the apprenticeship process.
And this is why I was touching earlier. Thanks, Org, for that. Because touching earlier on what Will was saying, which is that Jan LeCun's, and to be honest, other researchers as well, I think Li Feifei as well has been saying this, which is that with world models, you're incorporating a multi-sensory approach to AGI. And what that means is that you take human experience. If you think about the human experience, we don't learn purely from text. If we're to be trained on a job, whether it be legal, whether it be in finance, whether it be in a trade, for example, a spark, as an electrician, they got to go into the field and watch an actual experienced, accredited person work with wiring to know how to do it safely. And they may or may not get shocked a few times, and that experience teaches them how to actually do things properly.
And
Same
also,
with a mechanic, right?
And also, especially any jobs that involved humans socializing.
These jobs don't need socializing, right?
Yeah.
If I'm going to be a plumber and I'm going to fix a toilet, I can just go like nod and say, yeah, okay, I'll go and fix it. Minimal interaction.
Yeah, but
how you do it, because your experience, knowing how something works physically, right? That can't be necessarily written down.
I saw recently there's a clip of how in China that a plumber, their final exam is to be able to stop a hole, like water gushing out,
Oh, wow, interesting.
with just clay.
Wow.
And that's their final exam. If they cannot, apparently when the water is gushing out in a hole, there's a way that you can stop it with a clay, just with like
just
that,
the way you mold it, right?
just the way that you mold a hand determinedly, like you send this going in, almost like kung fu. And if you do it correctly, the clay just go right in and it
that
gets blocked.
technique, right?
Yeah, and if you actually hesitate it, you sort of shift your hand, or maybe your chi is not strong, then it
won't
doesn't
work.
Yeah,
and that totally makes sense. If you think about, I don't know if you've seen the Unitree robotics.
yes.
So with the humanoid robots.
Well, everyone should see that in the China Chunwan. They come out and
With the Spring Festival Gala.
Yeah, last year they danced, and this year they did the the kung fu.
Well, to be honest, last year was a pathetic dance, and then this year was actually really impressive.
Yes.
Some have been deriding it, saying that how that was achieved was taking actual artists, like wushu artists, and getting them to perform and recording their performances. But if you notice, there were actually a few times where there were because there were child participants there, some of them had actually made some mistakes. For example, there was a scene where some of the robots were jumping over a bamboo pole. And there was one kid, I remember, because he was a little bit larger as well, he accidentally didn't lower the pole
Enough.
and the robot still knew how to somersault over the pole,
So he's-
even though it clipped it a little bit,
So
and it balanced. And
he definitely wasn't mimicking a certain.
there's a degree of mimicking, but there's also, and this is where the machine learning comes in, it also knows how to deal with
Readjust the
the
angle.
readjustment to deal with these kinds of interruptions. And you think about humans as well. We don't think of how to copy paste experience over and over again exactly to a T. Everything, there's always a bit of, I experienced this before, this may be a little bit different, let's see how I can mix and match or spice things up a little bit.
Well, Mark Twain's famous quote was like, "History doesn't repeat, but it
Often
rhymes."
rhymes, right? And that's, I think that captures the essence of what machine learning and big data is. Like going back to Chinese medicine as the example that I think Org brought up with Will, which is that you've got this corpus of experience that has happened, and you're trying to figure out where all the commonalities are and how certain you are that that commonality is going to repeat again. For example, you think of Cantonese people saying "you yum learn cha."
Yes.
Like always,
Like I'm getting a bit heaty. I need
Exactly.
to drink this herb tea.
you know, you often say it's just like, oh, 有啲牙腫啊，肯定熱氣啦. Like you're definitely that heatiness, that concept of heatiness, right? Like we know that if we were to have something like I don't know, 24味 or something afterwards, that's really going to be. It does actually have this effect on us that we might not be able to explain with precision why.
Yeah,
it
what
happens.
is heaty?
Yeah,
right?
well, exactly, right?
Yeah.
But you know that if you're going to go on a bender and, well, I'm not
And
saying
then- and then
alcoholic
the-
bender, but
yeah.
deep, let's say fried food bender, you're going to have a lot of that. You're guaranteed to be very
Heaty.
Yeah, right.
And then there will be people go, oh, but you cannot drink yasei, mate. You are a little bit like you need something that it's a little bit milder, so like angok cha.
yeah.
And that's that sensing.
睇下你咩底咯. Like, what is your...
寒
what is-
底
Yeah,
係熱
exactly,
底
right?
Are you a cold base or like a heaty base? Yeah.
These kinds of concepts.
Yeah.
But explain it to someone who doesn't come from that worldview, and it's just like, what do you want about?
Yeah, no, but and also like for instance, like the pressure point,
Yeah.
Yeah. Saying that if you have a headache, let's press here and
But-
it doesn't make sense.
But yeah, if you think about it that way, because this ties in with effectively this idea behind world models, which is that you've experienced all of this, so much of it, capturing all of that other sensory data is surely going to lead you to be able to capture more data.
I think there's another thing is that I think in the past we go. The Western medicine would say, okay, if you have a problem with your head, then treat it round your head. Don't treat it like at the bottom of your feet. But nowadays, we're beginning to realize that with like trigger point, pressure points, with mild fascias, that your whole body is related to each other.
Well, this is what you call holistic healthcare, right?
Yeah.
And that's why that holistic view, I think, is now just being translated over into the machine learning space.
So with the data set, maybe there is holistic points that.
So this is what Org was saying earlier about the experiential aspect to learning. So as humans, I think there are certain domains that make a lot of sense where you capture that experiential data, whether it be physical in nature, whether it be auditory in nature, or even oral.
In Blade Runner, that was that famous "Tears in Rain" speech that I see, like Tenon Gate, being and then I see all these things, but now it's all going to be lost.
Or lost like tears in rain, right?
Yeah.
But that kind of it does capture something about the human experience. But if we're just going to talk about functionally how you get something done, then you can sort of try and park the emotions and everything to the side. But ultimately, though, that experience does play a part, I think. You also think about even team dynamics, for example, how people work together. Whether or not they've gone through hell together, that has a very tangible impact in terms of that hellish experience. If you analyse, say, a team before a hellish experience and after a hellish experience, obviously, depending on how successfully they survived it, those who survived it together are often stronger than ever after said event.
Yes.
And obviously, if it hasn't been successful, then they fall apart very quickly after that kind of event.
Well, yes, but I think it's the hellish experience. If you look at people who have go through like army buddies or like or film crews, they have a very particular bonds that
It's just like in law firms as well. You have teams of, say, a partner.
Went through
and
an
teams-
IPO.
It could be that. Oh, thank God I've never worked in that. But you've gone through something where it's like, for example, a deal that seemed like it would never end. And you actually get to the end of it and you know that what you did together led to that successful outcome. You are much more willing to trust others. Now, with LLMs and agents, I don't think we will get there anytime soon. But it's a question of whether or not, if it's not necessarily the human trust of a model, whether or not we want model agents to learn how to trust each other, and whether or not there is a metric
I remember,
for them to be
like
able to
at
trust each other.
Apple, it's always like we introduce each other's with it. This is blah blah. They worked on this launch or that launch.
Yeah.
And when you know they worked on this launch, Steve Jobs was involved. That means you pass through the Steve Jobs test, and then it doesn't matter your pay grade. It matters that you actually managed to work with Steve and you didn't get sacked.
It's like you went through the fires of hell. You know that you actually you can lift yourself out of hell, basically.
Something like that.
It makes sense, though. That does make sense.
And so, like, when are we going to have all the LLM models that
we can ask Will about that, but I'm sure that we're far and away from that. But at that point. At this point where we are right now, I think we have a huge divide between what mainstream popular media is saying and also what the big companies
especially
are saying.
Hong Kong mainstream media. Like, they still very often seems to only... Like, there's I don't think there's a big distinctions about even just... agentic AI and what like I think for most people right now, if they think about AI, common people is ChatGPT,
Only ChatGPT,
or maybe DeepSeek,
Copilot.
Copilot.
Yeah, to be honest, in corporate,
and then what you and everyone's building, right?
Yeah, well, what we're doing is completely different to that, right?
Why is it different? Please explain.
But I was going to say as well, as a distinction, because you look 40 kilometers away in Shenzhen, the worldview is completely different. Because if you ask them about AI, so just as an example, I was at Sam's Club just early in Zhongshan, and there was this lady there who was literally interacting with Qwen, asking it about a recipe that she was working on, and picking out the ingredients on the spot, using voice to interact with Qwen.
Wow.
Yeah. That was really fascinating and she was like probably in her late 50s. And I was thinking, why is there such an aversion in the Western world to engage with, or at least at that age, to engage with LLMs, whereas in China people
because of Terminator 2?
Maybe? But then again, like, even people my age wouldn't necessarily engage with so for example, I'm turning 34 this year. People my age wouldn't necessarily engage with LLMs in that same way. But you would see, say, Gen Zs and Gen Alphas definitely treat LLMs as the ultimate source of truth instead of actually doing research themselves.
But there's danger in that.
There is danger, and I think that's a separate discussion altogether. But pulling it back to the Hong Kong scene, I think the problem is that mainstream media here is always very behind. But there's very high trust in the mainstream media here. And that's a bit of a spicy opinion, but I think that leads people down a lot of primrose paths, in the sense that there's a huge mismatch between what people believe because of what they've been told and what the reality is, or what the coming reality will be.
But then it's just there's no other sources, they think.
But why do they think that when it's objectively false, right?
Well,
how is it possible to say there are no other sources if either A, you haven't looked for those other sources yourself, or they are there and you're just not paying
I think
attention
it's also
to them?
it's also quite far away. I think this is the reason why we want to do Hong Kong AI podcast, is that I think in Hong Kong there is a lot of people, like good people working on AI.
Yeah, there definitely are.
But if you look at the mainstream medias, you would think, no, there isn't anyone. Those are people who are working in the Silicon Valley.
Sorry, I'm just going to do a shameless plug right now. Like I am part of a group called AI Tinkerers, and this group has a lot of practitioners of AI. When I say practitioners, it's not just like, I practice an art. It's more people who are researchers, engineers, developers, startup founders. We even have people who are not trained. I mean, you've got Org, you've got another guy called Alex. Actually, I think he was on here last week.
Yes.
You know, they're not necessarily formally trained. I'm definitely not formally trained in software development or engineering, but people like Org and Alex are so inspirational because they have figured out a way of making LLMs work for them so well. And it just takes a bit of curiosity.
You don't need a degree in electronic engineering in order to...
You need to sit on your ass for long periods. Yeah.
What more can I say? But I mean, you do that for you do that in school anyway, so why not do it outside of school, right?
Jeremy also has really great taste in models, and he introduced me to Z-Image Turbo, which is spectacular, and also, of course, you're a Qwen fanboy. So
well,
please...
I'm an open weight model fanboy, so I love using open weight models because number one, I'm forced to. I don't want to put anything on the public on a public cloud.
Sorry, what is open weight?
Okay,
model?
that's a good question. So we're not going to call it open source. I'm going to be a bit pedantic here. So open source in theory means that you have open source in theory means that you have every piece of data available for anyone to look at. So if you were looking at an LLM, a truly open source model like Momo from Allen AI, you've got your training data sets, you've got the recipes for how you were running the training, and everything to do with how you get to the finished product. That would be truly open source. Open weight is, here's the files for the model, you can run it, but we're not going to tell you how exactly we got there. At least not in specific terms. So you may have research papers around what DeepSeek did or what Alibaba did with their models, but you only get half of the picture. You won't necessarily know where they source their data from, what was done to treat the data, how or why that is more in compliance with Chinese laws than they are with necessarily, say, US or EU laws, for example. You just don't know.
But at least you know quite a bit of how to...
You have some idea, and you can take those ideas and then apply them to your own training regime. But... yeah, anyway, with open weight, it's still powerful because, you know, I think it was the CEO of Airbnb that was saying 2 months ago on another podcast that most of Silicon Valley runs on Qwen.
Really?
And it makes sense because Alibaba's Qwen team has done amazing things with having models that are nipping at the feet of ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude. And that's not discounting others like DeepSeek as well. It's just that Qwen has small models that are able to really punch far above their weight. So what that means is that...
And if you don't understand why, then you have to listen to William's episode, right? Yeah.
I will also touch on this briefly, though. So the reason why that matters is because memory is a huge constraint. So memory is in how large your files are and how large your models are in terms of gigabytes or terabytes even. So there are rumors that, for example, Anthropic's Opus is probably a 2 trillion parameter model. What does that mean? That means that you need a data center to be able to run that model. For a consumer or someone who's trying to run it out of their living room like myself, I would need to build and spend a ridiculous amount of money to get something like that built.
That sounds very American, like, you know, using, like, you know, like a very, like, expensive, like, torpedo just to kill a little fly.
Oh, you're talking to a bit of a gearhead. So the analogy for that would be, say, I need to have a big Hummer, or I need to have this giant F-off huge, pickup truck, and it's got this huge 7-liter engine, but this huge pickup truck is literally the weight of a small goods vehicle, so I need a special license to drive the damn thing, and it's so heavy that it makes the engine so slow because your power to weight ratio doesn't make sense. So what Qwen takes is the more efficient approach, which is similar to how the Japanese were during the Malaysia of the 70s, where you go for smaller engines, but they'll be a much more fun experience because they're way lighter as well, and they'll get you from A to B. They might not be as luxurious as, say, a Caddy, but you know they're still pretty nice for what they are, and they're way cheaper. Qwen is very similar. You can have, say, a 35 billion parameter model that runs on only 1 billion active parameters. So it'll run on even a potato computer, and you can have someone that has AI at home now. It might not be right all the time.
Maybe even supply the electricity from the potato.
Well, I wish we were at that point.
I you have to teach us the workshop of potato computer, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
Grow a bunch of potato.
Well,
Yeah.
but I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, you can have handheld computers. Like I've got one which flips out almost like those palm top computers, almost like
I
that.
think next time you need to bring your gear.
Oh,
I know
more than
today
happy to.
there's a constraint, but
Yeah. More than
Nick,
happy
you need
to.
to bring your gear to show us what you have.
But the thing is, with these handheld PCs, because they're computers, some of them can even run LLMs. So imagine having LLMs run on the go. Qwen actually.
But what does that LLM what can they do? Like, can they do like sufficient tasks?
So if you're running, say, a 27 or 35 billion parameter model, you could get into coding and some sort of agentic framework practically on that tiny computer.
No,
That means
give
open claw.
Yeah, potentially. Even.
okay.
You can get little lobsters running on your computer
Yeah.
from anywhere. But the thing is, it's like these kinds of models, they're good enough that if you are hardware constrained and you don't want to pay money for say, ChatGPT, and let's face it, all of these big US startups, they are running on massive losses. Their cost of operation is so astronomically high. The only reason they exist is because all these funds have been funding them. And the only reason those funds have money is because they got funds behind them investing into them.
Yeah, that's like that's circular funding.
That touches on the circular funding bit, but reality is that there's a lot of money sloshing about in the US, and that's all been going into building out data centers. But there will be a day where they're going to have to go, we need to make money off of this. And what does that mean? That means that everyone's going to have to pay the equivalent of hundreds of dollars US per year to be able to justify the capital outlay that these VCs have been funding, really.
So it might not be sustainable.
So when I say hundreds of dollars US per year, I'm saying every single human in existence right now on this planet Earth.
Yes.
I'm not talking current users. So if you only have a few 100 million users, but you've got a population of 9 billion on this 8 billion on this planet, that's a huge mismatch. That means of those few 100 million users, they're going to have to pay thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars per year to justify the cost of everything, really. What does that mean? That means that we're going to be priced out at some point from being able to use them.
So
I would rather have it on a small computer then. I can have ChatGPT at home. Yeah.
So this is why, yeah.
No,
Yes, Uncle Op.
I also wanted to just bring up a more lighter topic, which is Pier 3. We had a couple of lunches there, and it's such a spectacular place. And maybe they can be a sponsor, or maybe not. We can just do something there. But please, how did you find out about this place?
I'm just trying to remember how I found out.
And then why is it so wonderful for dogs? We can just talk about that for a little bit.
Like what? You're bored?
No.
Well, first of all, we have to say, like, if you like us, you have to subscribe, and you should comment, and you should share the video, and also like a quick hello to Orky Lab.
Yes, Orky Labs. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Our venue sponsor, and there's, it's almost 9, so we're still able to get in and out of the building. So thank you.
Yeah.
If you have a venue that you think that is good for us to also shoot, let us know, and also, just show us some love. And I
think also show love to the space in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong doesn't get enough love from its own people, and we need to see way more of that. That's for sure.
I actually really think lately Hong Kong, like the coastline of both Hong Kong and Kowloon, as it starts to complete, it makes Hong Kong a very interesting city to live in.
Oh yeah.
To be able to walk from the west side of Hong Kong Island all the way to the east side is one of the most enjoyable experiences.
Absolutely. One of my best friends, he's Shanghainese, and he will always say, yeah, I'm sorry, but Victoria Harbour completely craps all over the bun.
And and also, I mean, a lot of people talk about how living in the Bay Area in San Francisco, or like you can, like 20 minutes you can be in the wilderness, and 20 minutes you can be in city. Hong Kong is exactly the same, if not more.
I would say even better.
We have a real city. I mean, San Francisco
is a baby city.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think Hong Kong has a mixture between San Francisco
Yeah.
and Stockholm.
Oh,
Because I think like Hong Kong has like this, 20 minutes you are in the city and 20 minutes you are in the wilderness. But also when you're in the wilderness, like in Hong Kong Island, you can basically in Pok Fu Lam, you're standing in the middle of forest, but you can see all this high-rise building. You go, oh, that's where I'm going to have lunch now. And then I think you can't do that anywhere else in the world.
Well, you're talking to an Australian, so I'm used to basically have just one from Sydney. So Sydney is just one city, one contiguous city, which is roughly the size of Hong Kong. And then you drive hours and hours away, and then you find another city which is way smaller, or another town that's way smaller, and then they're all pretty similar to each other. So to me, it's absolutely mind-blowing that I can just drive a car for about 26 minutes across a bridge, and suddenly I'm either in mainland China or I'm in basically a place which has Portuguese law.
Yes, and also, you can basically, Macau is a really interesting place that you can go into the nooks and crannies and can have very authentic Portuguese food.
Some of the best coffee I've had actually is my favorite coffee joint is actually in Macau.
And also, I think for someone who's creative and like to invent things, you can go, oh, I have this idea. I want to make something. I want to prototype it. I want to work with someone.
Cross the border, go to Shenzhen, cross the border.
Yeah.
Or even if it's not that, I've reconnected with a side of the family that's based in Santak. And just knowing how many different types of manufacturing there are, just beyond, Santak is famous for furniture. Turns out that side of the family is into appliance compressors. Very specifically compressors.
Yes, they're very, very specific. Different villages have very specific...
Yeah, but that village is next to another village, which is a component that is related to this other component, and then turns out this conglomerate of villages makes this one finished good and does it really well, better than everyone else in the rest of the world.
This is something that I think maybe some people still doesn't know about China. And part of it is organically formed. It's just because you have relatives.
Yeah.
And then you have big relatives group that, each village is just beginning to be specializing in certain things. Yeah. And then, but partly also have good government planning that they go, oh, wow, they are getting good at doing this. Let us, policy-wise, help them along.
Yeah. But just imagine, right, you've got all these finished goods. How do you get them out of that area in the first place to get to your destination, whether it be in the West or it be in the Middle East or in Africa, for example? You have to have so much logistical infrastructure in between, literally from the factory to the road to the port. That all of that comes together. Not to mention even all the electricity generation that goes behind all of that.
And one thing that I used to really enjoy living in Europe is the train system.
Oh yeah, but Chinese trains now.
But now, exactly, before it was when I was in France, in the late 80s, the TGV.
Yeah.
You go, okay, I can go here, I can go here. But now in Hong Kong,
with that reminds me now. So initially, I wanted to go and do the PCLL here after graduating. So coming straight to Hong Kong after graduating from uni. And one of the conversion exams I did was on Hong Kong constitutional law. And I remember for that year, the question was, how do you deal with the West Kowloon station? Because they enforce mainland laws in the West Kowloon station. I remember that was a huge political kerfuffle.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Does anyone now bat an eyelid at that?
I mean, at that time, I think there was some interest.
That aside, I know there's a lot of interest, but now does anyone bat an eyelid? Absolutely not. I want to get to Shenzhen in 15 minutes. I'm gonna go there now.
For me, I don't know where else I can. I used to do this quite often. That I would teach a course in Shenzhen for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
I would just go, from Hong Kong Island, go to West Kowloon, jump on the train, 15 minutes I'm in Shenzhen, teach the course, and then come back. I'm still in time for afternoon tea.
Even if you think about it, if you're rich enough to have a number plate, for example, you just drive across Shenzhen Bay Bridge, for example.
Yes.
And mind you, that's an interesting arrangement. I haven't been through there until last January. That was my first time ever crossing it. And I didn't realize they actually leased out a part of land at Shenzhen Bay, so that you enforce Hong Kong laws on the Shenzhen side. The whole bridge is actually, if you look at the signage, it's all Hong Kong road signage. When you get there, it's Hong Kong immigration.
I heard of this thing, but I don't know, so don't quote me if it doesn't work out. Like there's, I mean, actually, it's already famous in China that a lot of people know that right now in Guizhou, like that's not too far away from Hong
it's
Kong.
not that far.
It's actually another seaside town.
Yeah.
In Guizhou, there's pretty cheap apartments. So there's a lot of young people in China would go to Guizhou and live there and hang out. And it's apparently you can go surfing.
Yeah.
Really nice life. So in theory, you can almost live in Guizhou for part of your day. And then
it depends on whether they make those ports even more easy to cross at some point. If they do, and you make transportation even easier, then you can see that kind of outflow and inflow.
yeah.
It makes so
I
much
mean,
sense.
when England was still part of Europe, there was quite a lot of people that would
would just go-
live in London, work in London, and then
And then
go live in Spain.
Or I was going
Yeah.
to say Lisbon, or
Yeah.
even in Portugal, right?
Yeah.
So many.
And I think now that boat is sailed, but I think you can kind of do that in Hong Kong, and much more interesting.
Well, I have a friend's friend who lives in Shenzhen and works in Hong Kong. It's an hour's trip down to work. But to be honest, compared to, say, my mates back in Sydney, where they catch public transport, it takes an hour, and you still got a risk of getting, well, as in, yeah, it's like you've got a risk of the trains not working and this, that, and the other.
when I was little, it was quite normal for people to live in Sevenoaks and go to work in London. And that train is like at least an hour, and then once you get into Charing Cross, you still have to take the tube into city.
Yeah.
And for people to think that this is a long commute is ridiculous because that is kind of what the norm in England.
But for some, it makes sense. I mean, this doesn't bode well for property owners in Hong Kong, but the reality is the Greater Bay Area is going to be a thing. One thing that my uncle was saying was that he truly believes it can work because he's seen it from the manufacturing and the software side. You can bring it both together, and because you're all so close to each other and everyone speaks the same language at least, you can make magical things happen. And I think because Hong Kong has a very unique place, this is something that I've been saying for the last 10 years, Hong Kong's place is that our legal system is at a world-class standard. People trust it. Even in mainland China, they trust it. And as a result, that means that you want to do serious business, you come down to Hong Kong to do it. And we have all the infrastructure for you to be able to take it outside as well and go international. I think it's going to be less of the case where people are going to Hong Kong to go into China, and more so will be a case where people from China go out through Hong Kong.
Well, with that, this is a big love note to Hong Kong, right?
Well, I don't see why people don't see it, but you know.
And actually, on a good day, go to Pier 3, have a meal.
Absolutely.
You know?
Enjoy the view.
Yeah, take the ferry, go to Kowloon and walk around in the Kai Tak area.
I do remember. So going back to Aug's question, how did I find it? It was because during my first law firm internship, the senior associates took me there for a drink one Thursday night. And it was fascinating to see how packed it was on a Thursday night. For drinks, or Thursday or Wednesday night, and also just the pricing as well for that view. It's incredible. And then I can't remember why I went back there one time, but then I went there and was like, whoa, it's out in the open. I can bring my dog. This is amazing, and that's how we discovered it.
Well, with the note of your dog, that I know that your dog haven't seen you all day.
Yeah.
So not that I want you to go, but we kind of have to. Like so we'll be in your good graces that you're going to come back with your with your machines and stuff.
Yeah. Or
So-
if we end up at Pier 3, then maybe we can bring my dog as well.
I don't know about the wind whether we're going to have good audio, but let's see.
Ricky will figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was going to say clip-on mics or something as well, but there's
Yes.
always a way.
Well, thank you, Jeremy.
No, thank
Short
you,
and
Tanya.
sweet, but we'll definitely talk more. I know half of it is to talk about Hong Kong, but hey, we can ought to be.
We're here, which means that we can always talk about Hong Kong in Hong Kong, right?
Yeah, and so like us, subscribe us, and comment, and thank you to Okilab.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to Jeremy. Please
No,
come back
thank you
again.
for having me. Yeah, sure.